Aloha, everyone, and welcome to our Civil Beat Ideas Live show for Wednesday, January 27th, 2021. We're glad to have you with us. We're live, so we hope that you will feel yourselves very much a part of the conversation that we're going to have today about energy. Please feel free to drop any comments or questions that you have into the chat, and we will see them, and we will absolutely make those a part of our discussion today. Today, we're talking about energy, and we have two experts in the field with us. Jeff Mikulina from the Blue Planet Foundation is here, and Scott Glenn from the Hawaii State Energy Office is here, both the executive directors of their organizations. We're really happy to have you both. Thank you so much. And we were just discussing that it's quite an auspicious day when it comes to energy because President Biden just started the day by signing a series of executive orders looking at all kinds of different measures to focus on climate change, looking at the vehicle fleet of the federal government, looking at tax cuts for oil companies. And so I'd love to start, since we've all kind of woken up to news of that today, by asking you both for your thoughts on the actions that Biden has taken today, and if you feel like he's headed in the right direction, and what sorts of pushback he may be facing. And are there things that he hasn't done yet that you think that he should do? So Scott, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Thank you, Julia, and aloha, everyone. Good to be here today. First, I just want to say how great it is to be able to say President Biden. It's just such a relief to be able to say that and think that. And already government has a totally different feel to it in the space of a week. With the EO today, the executive order, it was quite a time coming. I think during the campaign, Biden grasped climate being an issue, and you can see it in the way he talks about it now. Even the executive order, he called it the climate crisis. He didn't call it climate change or global warming. He recognizes that drastic action is needed, and the executive order starts pointing in that direction. You mentioned the vehicle fleet conversion. I think that's important. He's also establishing two leads in the White House, Gina McCarthy to focus on domestic policy and John Kerry on foreign policy. And between the two of them, they're taking what President Biden is calling a whole of government approach. And so they're trying to infuse climate into everything the federal government does to apply that lens to it. And that's McCarthy and Kerry's role, is to make sure that lens gets applied in their respective domains. The other thing I thought was really exciting about the EO is that it makes environmental justice upfront an explicit concern of the federal government, and that they're also addressing the climate crisis as a national security matter. That's two things I think a lot of us have been pushing for years, and to see it embraced right off the bat from the Biden administration, I think is great. Jeff?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And thank you, Julia, for having us. Excited for the conversation. But certainly today, the past week, it's a new era. And good thing, because we have 4 years to make up for on climate after 4 years of not only inaction, but moving backwards really on what we need to do. So it's good that we're rejoining the international conversation on climate by rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement and then the executive orders today. And as you said, Scott, it's really key how he's infusing climate across all sectors of the government, and then throughout foreign relations as well. So bilateral discussions, trade policy, military policy will have more of a climate lens, and I think that's more important even than simply the Paris Agreement as it is, because this will really just align the power, the force of government behind our critical climate crisis. But Julia, as you start out with, some of the things are equally powerful. I mean, the procurement for zero emission vehicles for federal fleets is huge. As Biden said today, it's going to potentially create 1 million jobs in the automotive sector. And so this is the proper role of government to help kickstart some of those things and put money and put their lead by example, really, and show the power of government putting that to work for us for climate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, since I wanted to open our discussion with that because I thought it was on the, the sort of the top of everyone's minds. But from there, I'd love to go back and talk a little bit more just about your own backgrounds and your own work locally. And as I mentioned, Jeff, you've been the executive director of the Blue Planet Foundation for a number of years now. And you and your colleague, Melissa Miyashiro, wrote a piece for us in the ideas section back in August on your Waypoints initiative. Right? And that piece, just for anybody who wants to go to our website and look for it, was entitled Waypoints, Charting Hawaii's Course for a Resilient Future. And Scott, we haven't, you haven't written a piece for us yet, but what we will post here in the Facebook is a link to the 2020 annual report that was put out by the Hawaii State Energy Office, which is just, it's a fantastic document. It contains so much data on what's happening, and also a really powerful statement from you about where Hawaii is and where it has been and where it's going. So just to direct people to those sources of information and data for the things that we may talk about today. But I'd love it if you know, on the show, I think it's great for people to just have a little bit of a sense of who you each are. So if you could take a moment to just tell us a little bit about yourselves, how you came to become so involved with energy, and what it is that fuels your own passion to work on behalf of the climate in the ways that you do. Do you want to start with that one, Jeff?
Sure. Thanks, Julia. It's always difficult to point the spotlight this way. I've been working in this space, in the advocacy space, for 22 years in Hawaii. Started out as an environmental engineer, looking at a lot of problems in the rearview mirror, cleaning up sugarcane fields because they used to use diesel fuel to burn them, and fixing old problems. And that really inspired me to think more about how do we be more proactive about the challenges we face on Earth, and Hawaii being that model for the globe, because we are the perfect microcosm, every resource imaginable, and we can really demonstrate what a sustainable future looks like. So that's really informed, I think, my work. I've been fortunate to work with the Sierra Club and now Blue Planet Foundation in making that a reality. That's Blue Planet Foundation's theory of change: is can we inspire the planet with transforming Hawaii? And we're already seeing some of the fruits of that, with other states adopting a very similar policy to Hawaii for 100% renewable energy, and hopefully other policies. So that's really our work. My motivation is there's no more all-encompassing problem of our generation than climate change. And to me, at the heart of it, it's really about human suffering. We've been getting a taste of that. We see it, and we're sometimes see it at a distance, which sometimes lets us off the hook. But this is a very human challenge, and it's one where it's the perfect kind of merger of technology, which is something I'm fascinated by, and human behavior, which is another fascination of mine. At its core, it's really kind of a cultural issue, cultural in the broadest sense of humans and our behavior. So it's the perfect challenge, and I'm inspired by challenges, and this is the one of our generation. So I'm happy to be able to spend time tackling it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. How about you, Scott?
Can I just say ditto, except for engineer, and replace that with archaeologist? My undergraduate degree is in archaeology, classical archaeology, and I was on a career path to go into that, and did some excavations in Europe, in Italy, and was working on the past. And as I was learning about the past, I was thinking about today's problems, and unsure of whether to actually go into archaeology as a career. I ended up going to Japan for a while to teach English and kind of rethink my life, and realized that I spent all my free time reading about, at that time, global warming and these different environmental challenges we have. And I decided I didn't want to work on the past anymore. I wanted to work on the future. And so I came to Hawaii to go to the University of Hawaii, Urban and Regional Planning, to start working on, to get the skills to be able to work on the future. And I picked UH because it had a very human component to it. A lot of planning schools are very much physical environment, spatial buildings, almost architecture oriented. But UH's program is very much rooted in community and people. And so that was really attractive to me. And coming here, I felt like Hawaii's on the cutting edge, and people want to do something. People get it, and they get it in a visceral, existential way that you don't necessarily see on the continent, although people are starting to. But Hawaii had it 10 years ago, and we're also very fortunate that for that time we've had pretty much good political alignment among all of our elected leaders that climate change is a problem and something needs to be done. To what degree is varied by leader, but pretty much governor to governor, our congressional delegation, our elected legislators, everyone's pretty much on the same page. We got to do something. And that's really opened up a lot of space for Hawaii to show the leadership, like what Jeff just mentioned.
Mhm. Mhm.
Can I
That's
just
the
comment?
Sure.
You know, Scott, I did not know that about you, that archaeology was your training. My grandma passed away 20 years ago in Chicago, and I think she had no idea what kind of work I was involved with. And our last conversation, she said, you know, we never thought we'd have an archaeologist in the family. And I think that was the translation of what an environmental advocate was when you're born in 1908. So.
Follow-on question, was she thinking you worked on dinosaurs? Because that's what most people think archaeologists do.
Exactly, yeah, I'm sure. Not a lot in Hawaii, but.
Well, you know, I suppose we spend a lot of time looking at civilizations that maybe, you know, have collapsed in one form or another when you're an archaeologist. So leading into really the idea for our discussion today was just how green are we at the moment? And I thought, you know, it's start of a new year, and to really just, you know, I think one of the things that's so impressive about your office, Scott, is the amount of data that you make available to the public about what's actually going on out there in the world of energy. You know, one of the statistics that I found just kind of amazing in the last year was to learn, well, where exactly did all of the crude oil that was burned in Hawaii last year come from? And I think it was 57% of it came from Libya, 34% of it came from Russia, 4% of it came from Argentina, 5% from the South Sudan. And I found that just amazing, going back to what you were just saying about Biden and him making national security a part of the federal mandate to really look at our energy and where it's coming from. So that was just one little sort of astonishing piece of information, and I feel that your reports are full of that. So I really do want to encourage anybody who's watching today to go to, I think it's energy.hawaii.gov, right, is your website. And it's all right there and very accessible and very clear. But I think, so departing from that, I think in this conversation, if we could really sort of look at what is the picture of energy at the moment in Hawaii? I mean, I know that we have this idea that to get to 100% renewables for electricity by 2045, right? So how are we doing on that? What does it look like? And I realize that's a broad question, but I think if we could just start with, for example, last year, how much of our electricity was generated by renewables, and what sorts of renewables?
That's a great question. There's a lot to unpack there. We are still roughly 80% dependent on petroleum for all of our energy needs. And that's a point that I think gets missed a lot when we talk about the 100% goal, because that is focused on electricity, and our energy is not just electricity. And so we have a great goal on that part of our energy side, but that doesn't capture transportation, for example, which is now the largest source of our greenhouse gas emissions, more than power production. And I know the whole energy conversation is not just about greenhouse gas emissions, but it's an important driver, especially in the context of climate change that we're talking about. But you know, there's the money that leaves the state, about $3 billion a year goes to bring this oil here from these other countries. And during COVID, we began to understand that our energy system is much more interlinked than we thought it was, especially with our tourism industry. And so as we got to understand 10 million tourists flying to Hawaii every year, they're flying here on jet fuel. And that jet fuel, when they leave, is jet fuel that's made in Hawaii from the crude oil that we bring here. And the area in North Africa, it happens to be Libya, but it's kind of North African crude oil, is well suited to, I think, making the jet fuel. The one in Russia and the one in North Africa, one's well suited for jet fuel, one's well suited for low sulfur fuel oil based on the chemical composition of the oil. So that's why we bring it here, because those are the two that are best suited for the refineries that we have on island. And I just bring that up because there's a lot of connections here when we talk about our energy, that our existing system is really complicated, and we have to be mindful about how we transition over, because we often look at charts and data and think about smooth curves over time, but really it's chunky because we're taking whole power plants off at a time, and we need to replace them with whole sets of renewable energy projects. And the one that's in front of us right now is the coal plant. Our legislature passed a law last year, Act 23 of 2020, to basically not allow the continued operation of the coal plant. And so it's scheduled to shut down September 2022. So it's a year and 9 months from now. And between that time and now, we have to build several grid scale utility level large solar farms with batteries, as well as continue with a rooftop. So we need both of those to be moving as quickly as possible to be able to turn off this coal plant. And that's something that, because like I said, it's chunky, right? That you have to do a whole lot of projects to be able to turn one thing off on the fossil fuel side. And what we're used to is not having to have our energy footprint here in the islands, right? So where I've been particularly focused and why we did so much on the communication side with the report and education work is because we want people to understand that there are trade-offs that we have to make, and that for renewable energy to be successful, rooftop won't be the sole way to get there, that we are going to need these large-scale solar plus battery and other types of technologies too that will require land use. And so then we get into a whole different world of issues. But that's the real crux for us with renewable energy at this point, is thanks to all the great work that Blue Planet and others have done, a lot of the kind of low-hanging fruit, if you will, have been done. We've had tremendous success on a lot of that, and now we're kind of moving into the harder part, because our electricity statewide is, I think it was 29.7% or something close to that for 29.8% for 2019, and our RPS target is to be at 30% by 2020. So most likely we hit it. We'll find out when the 2020 end of year reports get finalized and published, probably next month or March. And so we'll know, did we hit our 30% by 2020 target? But that's still only talking about a portion of our overall energy picture. But it's an important one that's going to have more and more land use implications.
Sure, sure. Can I just ask a quick follow-up question? The coal plant, what percentage of, I guess it would be Oahu's energy does that produce? How big of a fact?
I don't have that fact state at the tip of my fingers, but I want to say it's a lot. It's the largest single source of power production, I think, on the island. Is that right, Jeff?
I can do a shameless plug right now and say Blue Planet's Island Pulse can give you that number. I just pulled it up to see what it is currently in real time, how much of our power is coming from coal. It's typically 15 to 20% though, so it's not insignificant. In fact, it's 16% right now as we speak, which is more than solar, about 11% solar. So Scott's spot on that we have a lot of work to do.
Right, right. So let's talk about that specifically. That's a great example. So now those panels have all got to go up. The land for them has to be found. The support for their placement on that land has to be found. Where are we with that?
There's a series of procurements underway by HECO, working with landowners, developers to put these projects in place. There's 2 rounds. The first round is about to break construction. The second round is really just getting underway and having dialogues with communities that would live around these projects. And those will be turning into eventually contracts before the Public Utilities Commission to review and approve. And then assuming that happens, then they would move forward to construction. I think it's not lost on anyone that some of these projects are going on agricultural land. And I think we want to be very sensitive to the need for Hawaii's food goals as well, and making sure that we're not sacrificing one for the other, but finding opportunities to really take advantage of both.
Mhm.
It's such an important message, Scott. I mean, we have more than enough renewable energy in Hawaii to power the state 10 times over and to power every jet that we have coming in and out. It's just a matter of trade-offs and making those explicit. And I appreciate what you said before about we're really bringing a lot of these things on island. They used to be exported. The impacts of our oil drilling exported to these other countries, and then the consequences of our carbon dioxide exported around the globe. So it's going to be present. It's going to be part of the fabric of being in Hawaii, but it's important. Energy is critical to our 21st century lives, and we just need to make the right decisions, open-eyed about where to put them, who benefits, and how to best proceed toward carbon-free.
Can I just ask a sort of a practical question to again give a sense of it? Like, how many acres would we be talking about? Roughly, if you have an idea, how many acres would you need to get in the solar panels that would be and batteries that would be necessary to replace the coal plant?
Great question. That's also a number I don't have at hand, but it can be calculated. And pretty much what we have in the works now going through the stage 1, stage 2 would be sufficient. So, but it's, we're not talking about tens of acres. So probably in the hundreds of acres across the island.
Okay.
I think it's important to note too that technology is evolving so quickly. That goes without saying. But what we're replacing, we talked about dinosaurs before. The coal plant is a dinosaur, and it burns, probably not dinosaur parts, but may as well burn dinosaur parts. We're replacing that with modern technology that's much more responsive and much more useful for us. And this is setting aside climate change and that challenge, and the fact that coal comes from Indonesia and elsewhere. But when we replace an inefficient coal plant, and they're only 30% efficient, with solar and battery, we have a much more responsive system where we don't need to produce that much excess power. We produce whatever power we can from the sun, we put it in batteries, and then we can use it whenever it's needed. So that's the exciting future that we're moving toward. And to respond to a previous question of how we're doing, I would say that we're doing quite well, and we're not doing nearly enough. There are some bright spots, and bright spot that I think Scott and I would agree is Hawaii right now, making rapid progress. And in fact, most of their power, their single biggest source of power for electricity comes from batteries. So this is just unheard of a few years ago, that we have an island that's largely powered by batteries. So this isn't some far off kind of Jetson sort of future. This is actually happening every day on Kauai. And about 20% of the time, that island is being run by nothing but renewable energy. So really exciting what KIUC and the folks have done over there, experimenting, being bold, doing some very innovative projects at large scale. So I think we can look to Kauai for a taste of where we might be heading for the rest of the islands.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to maybe talk a little bit more about how they did that specifically. And then, I know I keep coming back to data, but just so that people can have a sense of it in their heads, I would love to know how much power does Kauai use on any given day versus how much power Oahu uses, right? Like, are they using 5% of the amount of power, 10%, 15%? Like what's the difference in the systems?
It's an order of magnitude different. Let me just pull that up real quickly.
This sounds like a final exam for the chief energy officer.
The other thing is, when I ask these questions, it's not that I'm expecting chapter and verse, like you have to know it down to the
Right.
decimal point, but more
Well,
just as a kind of
yeah.
a general sense of, you know, what, because, you know, on the one hand, you could say, well, this island does this and this island does that. And so there's a kind of a parallelism, but in point of fact, there really isn't, right, between Kauai and Oahu.
Well,
It's not to say that
yeah.
Oahu can get there, but
That's what's really challenging, and I think gets overlooked a lot about Hawaii is we have this 100% RPS, and other states have since adopted it. But what we're doing is we're taking basically 6 standalone grids to 100%. And each one has a different renewable energy mix, different land use issues, and a different amount of energy and power that they use. And so we're basically doing 6 experiments all at the same time and trying to figure them out as we go. Whereas all the other states on the continent can just work with one continuous landmass, one grid that's part of the eastern grid or the western grid. And if they ever have problems, they can just rely on their neighbor states to help them out. We don't have any of those backups. So we really have to be thoughtful, cautious, and ensure resiliency as we move forward. And so you have, I have the number. So Kauai is about 80 megawatts peak power. And now just, you know, for comparison, the coal plant that we're trying to take offline is 180 megawatts. So Kauai's island-wide use is practically half of what one coal plant on Oahu is. And so Oahu uses about 1,200 megawatts. So it's a totally different scale. And Oahu is the only island that actually has these land use issues. And that's because we're dedicated to the idea that each island should be able to make its own energy. You know, several years ago, there was a debate about whether we would run cables between the islands and move electricity between the islands. And people said, no, that's not the direction we want to go. That's not the direction we're pursuing as the Energy Office. That's not the direction Governor David Ige wanted to go. And he said that publicly. And so we're really committed to this idea of each island using the resources it has to make itself resilient and have clean power available to it. And so on Big Island, you have geothermal, for example, you have solar and battery, and you have other resources. Kauai uses, they of course still have their fossil fuel plant, but they now have the largest battery in the state. They have, I think, the largest solar farm in the state. They have a biomass plant, and now they're proposing a pumped storage hydro project, which would be kind of like a battery, but it'd be moving water and then releasing water to help store and create power, and also help farming in that area. So that's a place where we're actually trying to bring them together, and instead of a conflict, be mutually supportive. So that's, I mean, it's some really advanced thinking that Kauai is doing, and that project will take them from where they are now at about 55, 60% RPS to over 80% if they build that project.
yeah. So, and so even though it's small, I take the point, Jeff, that you were making, and then Scott, that you were seconding, that Kauai is being very innovative. It sounds like they've really sort of taken it upon themselves to say, we're going to improve this situation. And so could you talk a little bit about how did they do that? Was it really just good leadership? Was it adequate funding? Was it, why is it that they seem to be ahead of everyone else on this?
Jeff,
I think,
I think you're well suited to answer this one.
well, I mean, I think we can speak to the structure of the utility over there is different than the rest of the state. And that could very well be a driver. It's a cooperative, which means it's owned by the members. The board of directors is voted on by everyone who pays for electricity on Kauai. So it's a different structure. They report to the residents of Kauai as opposed to reporting to shareholders. So you can just understand that it's just a different dynamic. Cooperatives, I mean, to be fair, they do have access to other streams of capital that maybe a investor-owned utility like Hawaiian Electric wouldn't have. But it does come down to leadership. And David Bissell is the CEO and has a great team that's not afraid to take some bets and to experiment. And they have, as Scott mentioned, some of the first not in Hawaii, but the first in the world in terms of the size of the projects, this innovative solar pumped hydroelectric project, and then some of the other cutting edge stuff that they're doing on Kauai. but probably it does owe to the structure of the cooperative, and it's something to look at, and it works for Hawaii. The good news is, I was just going to tease the fact that our Public Utilities Commission recently adopted something called performance-based rate making, thinking about how we regulate the investor-owned utility, and can we better align the incentives to what we really need as a community in addressing climate. And so, again, a first for Hawaii, a first for really the nation, the Public Utilities Commission adopting something last month that could really transform how our utility is rewarded for providing service, and getting it a little bit closer to what the cooperative inherently has in their model.
Can you be more specific about what exactly the PUC did? So are they trying to basically drive Hawaiian Electric in a different directions? And so, but you want to specify a little more about that?
Sure, and I know Scott's chomping at the bit.
I'm just reading how you translate the really wonky PUC
I know.
stuff.
That's the thing. So in a nutshell, and we don't want to drive like viewers away, it's really addressing this old model that we've had forever, which essentially rewards utilities for the amount of money that they spend. And it's something that I think the Wall Street Journal said it just turns like regular business on its head. I mean, that we shouldn't be, rewarding folks just for spending more money. We really should be outcome focused. And that's what the PUC attempted to do. One, to kind of disconnect sort of the provision of electricity from the expenditures that they're making. So they sort of have an estimate of this is how much it's going to cost to provide electricity for Hawaii. If you can do that, utility, if you can do that for cheaper, then that's going to be some reward to your shareholders. If you run an inefficient system, it might cost you more. So there's kind of a symmetrical reward and penalty there. And then introducing something called a performance incentive mechanisms, saying if you can reach our renewable goals faster, you might be able to bring in some more revenue for your shareholders. If you interconnect projects faster, if you reduce our greenhouse gases, the little rewards, little incentives that weren't there before. So we hope that it's enough of a nudge to just better align the utilities operations with an efficient, low cost, low carbon system.
Got it.
Did I get it right, Scott?
Yeah, and you're being unusually modest too, because Blue Planet had a big hand in helping create some of those incentives and really describing them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's a question from Thomas, and it ties a little bit too, because so we've got these PUC incentives, we've got this goal of 100% zero emissions by 2045, and yet here we are just talking in the very specifics of taking one coal plant offline. Granted, it sounds like a significant coal plant, but still, a big undertaking to find the land and get the approval and build the projects. So here's a question that's come in from Thomas that's related to that. Hard to imagine that one major project to replace Oahu coal plant could be completed in the next 18 months, not to mention 8 projects, even if offshore wind was already approved and ready to build. So what text are the proposed projects based on?
Okay, I guess I'll field that one. So we'll just totally bracket off offshore wind for a minute. And right now the projects are basically solar panels and battery storage. They're in various mixes. Some are standalone battery storage, some are both, and I think some are just solar. But maybe they're either solar battery or just battery. But at this point, there's this first round, the stage 1 projects that are pretty much through everything, and now they're just waiting to build. They might need 1 permit or 2 permits left from the city, and then they can go build. So they're basically done, and now it's just construction. And had COVID not hit, then they probably would have been through that already. COVID was a big factor in this too, because for months people weren't sure they could build, right? Or had to figure out how to have crews do work together on that outside construction side. So it's kind of in hand for those projects, but around the stage 2 projects, like I said, are still kind of on the front end of things. And they're also part of that. Although my understanding is if all of the stage 1 projects are built, then it should be fine for the coal plant. And not to mention the other resources that are also being brought online during that time. So there's a range of views about how on track are we to turn the coal plant off. And I think if we all focus on it, we can do it. It's just a matter of making sure that things move along. Now, I see another comment here about communities. And so I want to make a distinction here about these kind of projects, because some projects are basically at the construction stage, and there's really not much government can do at that point, especially if they have all their permits in hand. They're ready to go build, and they have all the entitlements to go build. And then there's projects that are in the development stage, where they're trying to figure out either they've got their power purchase agreement from the Public Utilities Commission, which is basically what they take to the bank to get a loan to build a project. And once that's in place, then they'll start engaging for real with a lot of communities and stakeholders and government agencies to really start fleshing out, this is how we're going to build the project. And then there's another group of projects that are still at the conceptual stage. Maybe we'll put it over here. Maybe we'll use this technology or that technology. And when you think about the level of community involvement and the opportunity to change things, that conceptual stage is where the most influence can be had by a community, right? It's in the conceptual thinking about things, expressing concerns, identifying areas that are desirable or not desirable for projects to go into. That second kind of level of projects where there's some design or some work that's already been put in, some of the alternatives have already started to be kind of narrowed off. And so you're really kind of working within a narrower range of what can be changed or adjusted, or how community input can influence the project. But I want to emphasize, I think that our role as the Energy Office and more broadly, that we want community to be engaged and have a strong voice about what's desirable. And we want projects to be the kind that people can feel proud of. They can say, this project is in our community and we benefit from it, and we see its value, rather than the dynamic right now where I think folks see projects as being imposed on them. And I think we need to move away from that.
So when you mentioned, for example, that conceptual stage, that's really the best point for the community to have input, in a practical way, how would that happen?
It takes some trust and boldness, I think, for people to think out loud in public. And a lot of folks like to button everything up before they go and share an idea, so that no one can take it, or it gets too derailed, or whatever. But I think there's a certain amount of engagement and dialogue and education that helps build a common understanding that people can work from. And then you can go from there to start having dialogue. What about this? What about that? And trying to focus in on what could work.
Can I ask just one more follow-up question connected with that? And that has to do, and I realize maybe this calls for some generalizing, but we're talking about all of these projects being developed, but who's developing them? And maybe you both want to weigh in on this. I mean, who's actually coming up with these concepts and getting these permits and building these systems? Are they local companies? Are they national companies? Are they international companies? Where are they coming from?
Yeah, I was going to jump in with just that exact statement, and I see a question from Sunny as well. And Scott's exactly right. In looking at the conceptual stage, it's not only bringing folks in early. There's some deep-set, long-standing injustice that has to be unpacked as well. There are communities that have been disproportionately affected by our current energy system. You can think on Oahu, out at the Campbell Industrial Area, and the whole Waianae side, saddled with the landfill as well as other projects. So there's that element. There's also the question you just asked about who benefits from these. And so there's I think a lot of conversation that needs to be had about what is the system that we want for Hawaii, who benefits, who owns it. By and large, all of these projects are being built by outside developers. And that's just the nature of this market. I mean, we don't manufacture panels here. We don't manufacture wind turbines. These large developers that have access to capital are mainland global companies. It's a very global market. They will hire local labor, and that's positive. And thinking also the juxtaposing between these large projects and rooftop solar, those are largely, or there's quite a few local companies, locally owned union companies that are doing that work. But it's a fair question, something that we should explore in thinking about the trade-offs. You know, can we have different structures where the community actually participates and benefits directly from renewable projects? There are places in Europe, in Ireland, where when they put in a wind farm, immediately that village or that community receives a revenue stream from that wind farm. If they don't own it outright, someone else may develop it, but then it's turned over to the local community for operating and enjoying the profits over time. There's certainly different models to look at, but we have to address that underlying, what's really fair. It might cost a little bit more to put projects in certain areas other than others. We might have to think about, if we're not going to do solar in these places, are we going to do wind elsewhere, or are we going to pay for more expensive energy that's we haven't thought of yet, offshore wind, or is it hydrogen developed from geothermal on the Big Island, or something else? But the current model, we'll admit, isn't working for everyone.
I'll just somewhat connect with that. Here's a question from David. How can government do a better job explaining the projects that we all need to meet the energy needs we have? I have a large property in Manoa. I'd be happy to place wind machines on, but I know that the neighbors would lose their minds. So I guess, that just goes back to this whole question of who has input into the decision making. And as you pointed out earlier, Jeff, so many of the negative impacts just happened somewhere else. Somebody else had the oil drilled on their land and it just showed up in the islands. So maybe, I'd love if we've been talking for 42 minutes now, so we'll probably go for maybe another 15 minutes or so. And I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about maybe other renewables in the state that show real promise. Like what's happening with geothermal? What's happening with offshore wind? What's happening with wave technology? Are there any kind of exciting projects that you're aware of that are coming online that look significant? Keeping in mind what you were saying, Scott, about how each island is an entity unto itself. And so different islands are going to have different fuel sources.
I can talk about that, but there is another energy source that we haven't talked about that Blue Planet's also been really greatly involved in, which is energy efficiency. It's the negawatt. So, geothermal, we have the Puna project coming back online, and now I think it's at about 30% of production, and there's some discussion about expanding its production capability. Offshore wind is still in the feasibility stage. Can we do it? How would we do it? Where could it even go if we did it? Although there are developers who have proposed uses. And wave, we have a really cool project off Marine Corps Base Kaneohe that's looking at, I think, a 1 megawatt experimental project that's pretty neat. So there's those are going. OTEC as well, Ocean Thermal Energy Conversion in Kona, another really exciting technology that seems to just be waiting for that secret sauce to break out and become a massive technology. But I think, all of these are things that are looking to the future. But the thing we can do now, that's the cheapest thing to do, hands down, is avoid energy use in the first place. And we'll kick it over to Jeff. You guys have done some really amazing stuff and even foisted it on us to do with the appliance efficiency standards through the legislature. But I don't know if you want to talk about that, but avoiding energy use in the first place is our best strategy. It's the best arrow in our quiver.
This seems like a natural way into talking about waypoints, Jeff.
Sure. Yeah, certainly. And that's one of our pillars and waypoints is how do we just be smarter about using that energy that we're already creating. Um, Scott's right, and we never talk about this because people just, oh, light bulbs, turn off the lights. No, it's exciting, and it is the largest resource. And I think it's fair to say it's probably our largest clean energy source over the past 10 years. If we looked at where we would have been had we not done all the great stuff Hawaii Energy is doing, the State Energy Office, others, contractors doing excellent work. We have some measures this session, also looking at energy efficiency. And Scott's right, the legislature adopted appliance efficiency standards a couple of years ago to try to rope in some additional appliances for state standards, not just federal standards. We're hoping to have a local appliance label. So when you go shopping for a new refrigerator, you see that energy guide label and it says how much you're going to save if you use this unit versus this unit, but it's utterly unhelpful because it's based on mainland prices. So we pretty much have to multiply that by 3. And that could tip the scales if, gosh, this one costs $100 more, but I'm going to save $200 a year. It's a no-brainer. And folks are unfortunately ridiculously myopic when it comes to those decisions. And so the extent we can kind of nudge people and get people to make the right choices so we don't have to build more solar than we need or oversize systems. So that is the first order of business. I'm glad you mentioned waypoints. It was our best attempt at kind of laying out what we see as some near-term and midterm opportunities to respond to this particular moment in time that we're in, where we face multiple crises at once, and economic crises, climate, economic inequality, justice. What are some of the tools that we can deploy to help us recover in Hawaii and recover in a different way, not just go back to normal? So it's 50 actions. People can check it out at waypointshawaii.org. Some are already done. Some are fairly simple, straightforward things that we think would make Hawaii a better place to live. Others are deeper, more systemic changes that we think are necessary. And a lot of those have shown up in our policy package this year at the legislature. And so we hope to advance some of them. Obviously, most of the attention will be on the state budget and other priorities. We think this is a priority too, and there are ways to kind of address multiple problems at once. And that's what we are hoping to do with waypoints.
You want to talk about what some of those specific policies are?
Sure, certainly. One of them is something that we haven't talked too much about is electric vehicles. And so we are actually making pretty good progress on electric vehicles. Over the past year, they've been the most popular vehicles in Hawaii. Registrations for electric vehicles have increased, while registration for gas vehicles have actually decreased. So we think we might be at that tipping point. One of the challenges, though, is charging. People who live in multifamily, a condo, have a challenge charging right now. There's not a lot of workplace charging, and that's really where we need charging so we can charge during the day for when we go back to work or back to offices. So we have a measure that would provide a rebate to install electric vehicle charging infrastructure, chargers, with a focus on multifamily and workplace charging. Of course, there's no money. So the idea behind this policy is to add a small fee on luxury gas guzzlers and use that money to help pay for infrastructure for electric vehicles. And we think that will help break down one of the barriers that we currently have to adoption for electric vehicles and make it easier for more people to get into modern mobility.
Mm-hmm. Scott, is the state doing anything, or is there just no money for that? What's happening with state vehicles moving towards?
The state is finally doing something about this, and it's very, very exciting. One thing that the state's good at doing, right, is setting goals, and then we move into the world of procurement and contracting, and things just kind of turn into this morass for months, maybe even years, and then out pops a contract sometime later. And people say, oh yeah, we were working on that, weren't we? And we're past that point now. This past year, the Department of Transportation Highways Division took the lead and put together a request for proposals for EVs and EV charging infrastructure as a service. And so this is an innovative approach for the state in terms of trying to do a contract. Usually we just buy stuff. and then we own stuff, and then we maintain stuff until it comes time for us to dispose of stuff. And all of those things take time and have all these process steps tied to them. And what this does is it cuts out all of that because it's a service, right? So we get the EVs for a period of time. And then when we're done with them, what it does is it helps create a used EV market for the public, because the state has used it for a year. It might have some mileage on there, some use, but then once we're done with it, it goes back to the dealer or whoever, and then they can try to sell it after that or lease it to somebody else. And so that's something we think we can help the public with. But also on just the side of state spending, when we look at the cost of having a vehicle in the fleet, right? You can look at it as if we have an internal combustion engine or a gas guzzler, we have to look at it from cents per gallon per mile, right? That's what we look at from that point of view. When it becomes an EV, we start looking at it from cents per kilowatt hour. And cents per kilowatt hour hands down beats cents per gallon per mile in terms of saving money for the state and the distance that you can drive. And so already right there, it's cheaper for us to have an EV. But more than that, EVs are cheaper to maintain. So we don't have to spend as much money fixing all these moving parts that you have in a gas engine that break down, all these fluids that you have to have, all that stuff. And because it's a leased vehicle, if the vehicle does break down, we just give it back to the dealer and get another one. And I'm really enthusiastic about this contract because, with DOT, we did a lot of work helping them flesh it out and do a lot of market research and get through the procurement stage. And the last major feature of this is that any state agency or any county agency can take advantage of this contract. And so if you want to buy some vehicles for your department, you can opt into this and use it to get EVs for your agency. And the more you do at a time, the cheaper it is for everyone. And so again, there's another incentive to try to lasso up as many as you can and do a big chunk and convert to EV, and not just onesie twosies EVs as you go and have the money for it. Get a whole bunch of them, replace it. And that also helps pay for the charging infrastructure costs too, because you're getting a bunch of EVs that will be using it. So I know I'm going on and on, but this is, we're really excited about this. And we think we're past the biggest lift of the public fleet conversion. It's getting a contract in place to actually allow the state to buy stuff and then be able to get rid of its internal combustion engines. Maybe last point is that I think we also need to think about, are we going to do a one-for-one conversion, or really should the state fleet be as large as it is? In other words, we should maybe think about shrinking the fleet, especially if the state's going to do more working from home, which we want to encourage. Then that means less need for driving, less need to fly inter-island and have cars available for that person from Oahu who lands on Kauai to do business for the state for the day. Maybe they're not going to go to Kauai now, and so we don't need that car sitting over there for them, or as many cars sitting there ready for use. So again, we can downsize our fleet to save money. That's the efficiency side of the equation. So I think there's a lot of promise, and we now have the best tool in our toolbox to handle it.
Yeah, and don't forget bicycles.
I love bicycles, and I'm sorry, this is my own soapbox. Is the equivalent of energy efficiency of changing your light bulb is riding a bicycle. That's the transportation side of energy efficiency, and we don't spend enough time on that, but I think we need to do more.
Yeah. So maybe one of the last questions I wanted to ask you both, because you both pay so much attention to what's happening in the world of energy, and I wanted to ask you both if there's anything, looking at it really on a global level, if there are any innovations that you're aware of at the moment in the world of energy that you're excited by, that you think show tremendous promise, that maybe we in the general public aren't really so aware of yet. But when you look forward and you think, oh my God, this is so cool, and it really has a possibility of being transformative. What do you see? Jeff, do you want to take that one first?
Sure, and I'm going to bum Scott out because I'm going to take his thought. But I want to share it with a caveat. I mean, I think that technology is hydrogen. Hydrogen being the most basic element, the most common element in the universe, and it's an energy storage essentially. It's not renewable energy. It's something that we can use as an energy carrier, and we can make hydrogen with renewable sources: solar, wind, geothermal, anything, and then we can use it directly by burning it. We can use it in a fuel cell. They're experimenting using it in aircraft. It could be the universal sort of fuel of our future. And it's happening. We're seeing a large German company, Siemens, putting in offshore wind in the North Sea solely for the purpose of generating hydrogen to use in industrial processes and other things. So this is already happening. For Hawaii, this could really be our future when it comes to the big chunks of energy that we have to solve, like jet fuel, transportation fuels, cooking, replacing our gas system, and then long-term storage for those times we have 40 days and 40 nights of rain. So that's really, really exciting. But just a caution to your question, because I know I'm kind of a technologist and I get really excited and enthralled with these things that are coming, and electric cars and breakthroughs. I think the biggest innovation that we need, though, is to really address the lumpiness and the inequality in our energy system. And we see it in a small scale in Hawaii, where you have folks that are participating in a clean energy future and folks that are simply left behind because of the circumstance, because of a financial situation, for whatever reason. We have to fix this across the globe and make sure that everyone can participate and everyone can truly benefit. And this is why I think climate is tied so closely to so many other social challenges that we face. We can really solve a lot of things by getting climate right and doing it in the right way so that everyone benefits. So that's where the innovation should be. As much as the engineer in me wants to look at the technology, we need financial innovation. We need innovation in policy to really solve those deep set systemic problems.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a great closer, Jeff. I don't know if I have more to add to that. Maybe I'll take it a slightly different direction on the climate side. Rather than energy, what's really exciting is we are now getting to the point where we realize we need to do industrial removal of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. And this is a challenge. It's still experimental. We know how the tech works, but we haven't scaled it up to where there's fully functioning for-profit entities doing business on it. But our goals, the Paris Agreement, for example, says for us to be net zero by 2050, which is what the US and the UK are talking about, means that we have to have negative emissions as part of it. And Hawaii's own goal is to sequester more than we emit as quickly as practicable and no later than 2045, which also means we need negative emissions. And trees aren't going to get us there by itself. We absolutely need trees, but we also need machines to pull greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. And so there's a lot of questions and innovation around that. What do we do with it? How can we create a financial incentive for it? Do we just need to command and control, build factories to pull greenhouse gases out? And that's a really gnarly, hard conversation right now to talk about it. But to the point of equity, globally, a lot of times we talk about just eliminating our emissions, but we're the beneficiaries of past emissions. And so there's people being adversely affected by climate change. The low-lying Pacific Islands, sea level rise, flooding in Bangladesh, they're all suffering the effects of the economic benefits that we got from burning oil over the past decades. And so for us to just eliminate our emissions and say we're done, I think is insufficient to the scale of the problem and the kuleana we have to the rest of the world. And that goes for the US and other countries too.
So that ties it back to what you were saying with Biden and his executive orders today, and the way that he also has brought this back to environmental justice. And I really appreciate that this is the point that we've come to in this conversation, because it ties to so many things about, and it's, as you say, everything's linked. When somebody goes to the gas station, they're not thinking about the fact that what is coming out of the pump has come from Libya, but in point of fact, it has. So, and then what is that doing to the land there, to the water there, to the air quality there? And I suppose the question really, if it even is a question, is just how to begin to make people more aware of that reality, to make those connections more absolute, so that people feel them in a tangible way. And it's not just out there.
Yeah, I think a lot of education's needed. And one of the comments we got, I know we're getting towards the end of the hour, but one of the comments we got is the Energy Office in the past has tended to do education from a very high level abstract. Here's a grid. Here's how a grid works. Here's how things plug in. And then we don't get to how that listener sees their own connection until we've lost them 20 minutes later in describing how a grid works. And so we're trying to invert our own discussion and start with, here's your house. This is your circuit. And do a whole ankle bone connects to the leg bone, connects to the thigh bone, up into building up into how the system works. You're starting here from your point of view and you're part of this larger whole. And one of the ways that we're trying to actually do better about that is we just started a new Instagram account. We haven't been on there, so this is new for us, but it's Hawaii Energy Gov. And we're trying to do that exact thing, start with kind of the basics of energy, of a particular topic, and then slide by slide build on it and make it a little bit more complicated, introduce a little bit more, terminology, jargon, to help folks kind of feel a little more comfortable with the topic and who some of the players are in it. But that's kind of one approach that we're trying to do to help get to that exact thing. How do people actually understand their place within this larger thing?
Mhm.
Scott, Instagram is so 2018. You guys should be on TikTok. Come on. 15-second videos. Julia, I would think to answer that question also, I think the most powerful tool we have is social norms and really changing that culture of energy and how we think about it. Blue Planet's sort of attempt at that is called We Are 100, and people can check it out, weare100.org. And it's stories from folks around the state that are doing some durable action in support of our 100% clean energy future. So people encouraged to go check that out and maybe get some ideas of how it relates to their lives. Are there things that they could change that their neighbors are already doing that they could learn from?
Yeah. All right. Well, I really want to thank you both. I think this has been just a tremendous conversation. We covered a lot of ground, and it's been a lot of very good energy. So maybe later in the year you'll come back. We'll have another conversation to see what things are looking like to the future. But for now, I'm sure the viewers would join me in thanking you both very much for doing this.
Mahalo.
Thank you, Julia. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure, guys.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Take care.